Welcome to Discograffiti's Private Press, the Patreon exclusive podcast that's truly the collective endgame of the music deep dive, the self-released private press universe. There's every possible type of genre in here, yet all of it's got one thing in common, something to which your two hosts can totally relate, and that's being derailed by life's curveballs. The lives these artists wound up leading were not the rock and roll lives they'd had in mind, yet they created some of the greatest music ever made, and it's high time we started to recognize it. I'm your human being, Dave Gebrow.
And I am your transcendental human being, Paul Major.
I am in thrall. In this episode of the Private Press, we will be lifting the lathe on the 500 copies and then the 500 additional copies, more on that later, of Dennis the Fox's 1972 Private Press LP, Mother Trucker. Let's talk about that cover. A naked chick with a fox that kind of looks like a biker tattoo design.
It grabs you right away. You know, part of it is yellow and black are rather grabbing colors anyways. And when it's, just yellow with the black lettering and that incredible artwork, instantly you're thinking, yeah, this biker thing is sort of coming in. You're thinking, yeah, truckers, of course, Mother Trucker. Before even hearing the record, it's sort of like, whoa, that subculture, that part of the, wasteland of America is already sort of presenting itself, and just in the way it looks, until you flip it over. And then you look at the picture, and the picture of him is a little incongruous to the, because he looks like a fairly, tidy sort of person, a bit of a shag haircut, the glasses, the little joke about his being Italian on the back. When you're expecting to flip it over and see, one of those guys that's the guy in the band that looks like he could be in the Hell's Angels. He's a music guy, and it astonishes me, that there's a little bit of a tension created there, which puts in my mind. And after, finding out more about him way later, after I had, created that part of the universe in my mind that this record occupies, it makes it more like, okay, this artistry of this guy's coming across more. He's totally convincing. I thought he was one of these end of the night, sort of people that had to get this record out and was very troubled, and to find out, no, he had his act together. He knew what he was doing. And
this is kind of a weird one, because this is a very interesting record for people like you and I, who find that putting copious amounts of time behind letting your imagination run wild, behind the musings of a man who was, clearly more than a little deranged, yet totally acting in a sane manner about his derangement. This is the kind of record that unlocks your imagination. This is a guy who intended for one thing and landed on something entirely different. And somehow the discrepancy there is endlessly inspiring. You can hear it in the language that you've chosen, from your book. It's, I'm quoting you now. Like seeing God in a burst condom stuck to the tailpipe of a rusty pimp mobile, finding out Jesus stole your mama, looking for the meaning of life in a puke pile by a truck stop motel. Kind of scary how real this dude is. Deep level real people music that sounds like no other LP in the universe. Everything about this sound could not possibly add up in anybody else's mind, but Dennis has put a new place on the map. So you can hear the flow of your, almost Kerouac style typewriter roll language is because this thing, it visits all different kinds of places. It uses and utilizes all different kinds of voices, metaphors for power and adventure and conquest. It's crazy.
It has all of this. And one of the interesting things that I found out, of course, again, much later, too, is like Michael Fornetti, for instance, when he was doing this, he was looking to capture sort of the range of things he can do. It wasn't intentional, like I'm going to show my versatility here and show some different styles.
As a filmmaker, when you open up a casting call, there's a type of resume that you get that's a quadrant style. and it'll show like a doctor in one corner, and in another quadrant will be like a caveman, and it's an external way of showing range.
Yeah, range. Mm-hmm.
But you can usually tell bad actors because they will use that kind of a resume. Whereas in the private press world, it is a whole other thing that winds up breaking the shackles of what's expected commercially.
Yeah, it is. And it's also, it really personalizes it as well.
If you think potentially this is the only shot I'll ever have at doing something like this, it's everything in the kitchen sink. Whereas if you're having a career doing this, a lot of it is going to be restraint and what you don't show, what you don't reveal. Beyonce or whoever it is, she's not going to tell you what's really going on in her soul.
That's a whole nother world that I do not have time for. It seems to be, the norm now. It's always when it gets to that level of penetration of markets and stuff like that, it's product, and product imposes. And even when people sound like in their voice, they're trying to really get their feelings out. Yeah, it's smothered by the calculation. So
that's precisely and very, very eloquently put.
Now, Dennis doesn't have that. And in fact, one of the things I like about the record overall is it's not a high-tech recording. The songs have a lot of arrangement going on and so forth, but it keeps what could be a live band sound. It's not manipulated sonically. It reminds me in a loose sort of way, it has a bunch of Americana sort of aspects, but maybe a more recent, truck stops, et cetera, Americana.
You just unlocked this. I hadn't thought of this previous to this moment. It kind of has the vibe of Gene Clark's No Other.
Yeah, Gene Clark, No Other. Also, like some of the early band records, as far as the performances go, the way the guitar fills come in, his voice is very different, but there were several songs on here. I did my little mental thing when I was re-listening to it and thinking, oh yeah, I can hear in my head the band doing that song, like the Nellie Was a Lady one, which, is sort of a death country influenced song. And I'm thinking, that could occupy a sort of Americana via the band type territory like Long Black Veil did. It occupies that space.
Yeah, you also got that Home on the Range kind of harmonica going on that one. That is the most band-like song. So, usually we talk about the people in the band, but it's better to go this route on this one. Let's suffice it to say, lots of random session musicians and backup female singers from, I would imagine, Roadhouse bars.
I think the backup singers sort of had a name, Sweetness and Light, that they used, the four women that sing the backups. And some of the players in the bands were musicians from other bands like the Viceroys and the Surprise Package, other Pacific Northwest bands. So there's a little connection of these session players floating around were local music scene guys that, had done sort of other things. And him being on the scene there, he pulled them together rather than, being a band, the band was assembled to make the record.
So I just kind of want to get it to where Mother Truckers released. Previous to that, approximately 10 years previous to it, Dennis the Fox, his name is Dennis Calderola. When he was in high school in the summer of '64, and he was 16 years old. He was in a band called the Rum Runners that played teen dances and whatnot. They actually opened for the Yardbirds in July '67. They broke up about a year after that when Calderola opted to leave Seattle University and study in Florence, Italy. So when he came back from Italy, he started playing the Hammond organ with Hug, a band that had been around since '68, performed with them into 1971, and then committed to becoming a genuine rock star and became incredibly finely focused on writing original material. So by '71, Calderola was associating with Dave Clark, who was a local businessman, and began serving as his manager. So together, they concocted a plan, not unlike Bowie and, Main Man, this kind of thing. Keep that in mind when you view this record. You got to view it through that lens because that's the lens that it was, birthed from. So together they concocted a plan where Calderola would get a record contract and be famous and filthy rich. The first step was to drop his name and get a new stage name. Done. I mean, you can't lose with a name like Dennis the Fox, right, Paul?
That's a good one. It's memorable. It'll look good on a little marquee.
Yeah. So next, they got a bunch of session guys together. And then oddly, the next step after that, very strange. They all got together in a shutdown downtown menswear shop that Clark still held the lease on.
Yeah. And they brought in the recording equipment. And I think this is one of the positive factors in doing this is because they had their own setup in a place like that. They had unlimited time for the recording. They just, had to wait till it was quiet enough outside. Not to have to bother about ambient noise. But if they would have had this plan and booked a studio, the odds are iffy if it's all happening when there's a limited amount of time. You have this stuff you want to record. Can everybody get it together? Do you lose something because you're under pressure and it doesn't work in the favor where the pressure enhances the performance? It's important with this record because there's so much variety. There's so much going on with the arrangements, which are not overdone, but they're pretty elaborate and pretty varying. You can sense in the way they're playing, they're feeling loose. They feel more like a live band at a groovy show or something when they're playing. It has a warmth and immediacy that's not forced. They basically had this thing they wanted to achieve. They had the right conditions to do it. And I don't know how long actually they did spend on it, how much time was spent jamming these things, how much, pre-arrangement there was, but you can tell they weren't rushed.
He said, we were trying to get a record deal, so we cut all of these tapes of various songs in various styles to show how versatile I could be. And so what happened was in September 72, Dennis and Clark, they went to Hollywood, began hustling the tapes around to all these record companies. And what Dennis said was, to our dismay, the record labels found the material too versatile for their marketing purposes. So the whole thing was a complete backfire. And so 3 months passed, the guys ran out of money, and they came back to Seattle because they had no choice. That's when they decided to release it independently on the Musart label, which had previously only been used apparently for releasing religious choir LPs. So they ordered 1,000 units from a pressing plant, also arranged to have, the same amount of cardboard jackets ordered, which included this. If we told you the biggest rock star of the mid-70s would be this four-eyed Italian from Seattle, Washington, you'd laugh your ass off. Start laughing.
That was written after, they figured, the labels are going to be all bidding for us. And, of course, it sounds too far out. His voice doesn't sound particularly commercial.
When the discs came, it was discovered that there was a shitload of defective copies, and there were skips within the first tracks. So Calderola and Clark, they sat down in his parents' living room and they tested all 1,000 of the records on the family's hi-fi system. And in the end, they chucked about 400 of them. The remaining 600 were loaded into the covers that the two of them had to glue together one at a time by hand. Then they just loaded up all the copies into their car and went around to a bunch of local record shops that accepted, like small quantities on consignment basis.
Right. And that's the only way to proceed. At that time, distribution was locked up by big labels and that. And if something starts some action, they'll take it on and so forth. But basically, you had to do it yourself. And I think the fact that they had 600 good copies, so to speak, they actually moved the 600 copies.
Where these guys clearly have a crazy get up and go attitude about this stuff. But clearly, this was not the plan. In fact, it was the opposite. He was going to be like Bowie. And then,
I thought that, yeah.
Yeah. So,
and he had been in the biz, starting in the early 60s. He had been in the biz and around the biz and also working as a song plugger, and of course later, more so with Tom Bell and so forth. But he's a guy that also was sort of working on that scene, various jobs in the entertainment and music business. So it's like he was an isolated guy. He was a guy on the scene at the time, that had connections. So
did you discover this thing? Was it you?
As far as I know, I can't say that some other people might have had it or not. But when I had it, and for quite a long time, I hadn't seen another, copy in a list or anything. And this would be mid 80s, I guess, or so. As far as things go, that was the first person sort of hyping it up, as being special and so forth into these channels. But it's possible, again, some other people, as is the case with almost, anything that's possible, there's some secretive, fanatical German collector, who was operating in the mid 70s, who won't let anybody know what records he has because he's so secretive about it. As far as, I think, shining a light on it is something special, which of course, right into the real people, thing for me, and entirely, all the elements, the voice is singular, sounds like nobody else. The mixture of the songs, I can't think of another record that sounds like it. It's another one of those. There's a lot of familiar things going on there, but the convergence of the elements, and especially the literate lyrics, he's a seeker, but he's doing his seeking in the more tawdry, low-life, marginal, truck stops, sleep dives, America.
Here's what I really love about this dude is that, the seekers at that time were seeking in a very milquetoast, James Taylory kind of way, and not with heroin either, because those guys, they were navel gazing. This guy, it's like an action movie. He's a pirate. He's swashbuckling all over the world in all different, get-ups. Feels like he changes characters. It's an amazing, almost method actor way of navel gazing or revealing yourself, or that aspect of it. I don't know any record that does that. Do you?
It's pretty unique. I zeroed in on that for sure. This, the idea, like here's a seeker, that's doing his seeking on the underbelly, rather than, like you say, the more idealistic visions of utopia feeling. It's a really realist type of situation with life. And when he speaks about some characters and so forth, he's doing some storytelling there. He's setting some scenes, and a lot of the time he's not the character. He's presenting the character.
That's true. You can sense that there's not an involvement necessarily, but he's engaged. Let's drop the needle then. 7 Nights on the Barbary Coast.
Interesting way to open the record, and it's one of those cases where you hear that and you have no idea what you're in store for. You get a basic flavor, but to me, it's one of the lesser tracks. I like it a lot. I like, where he's singing about sailing away, having the adventure, escaping his mundane life. It's interesting that he mentions the Barbary Coast and brings a little bit of the pirate sort of sense of the adventure there, which puts it right into an outsider way of life immediately.
You know what this reminds me of, although it's like a ridiculous comparison, but it's kind of a Vegas twist on Stagger Lee. That self-aggrandizement kind of a thing. You got to love on the fade, him yelling out, "I'm going to be a swashbuckler, baby."
Swashbuckler, yeah. Because he's not explicit about the pirate that much, except, when you hear Barbary Coast, of course, you associate that, but he's singing about sailing away and escaping. So it's nice how he makes it explicit at the end.
In case you missed the metaphor throughout the entire song.
Right.
I think I like that one better than you, but it took me a little while. I had the same feeling as you initially, that little bit more middle of the road, but it's grown on me.
Yeah. And this is another case for me where it all works kind of seamlessly now, even the lesser moments. But in my early listenings to it, about half of the songs really leapt out at me, and the other ones, seemed a little more ordinary. But the cohesiveness of it, of his voice, and the presentation has done that thing again, where now I can't help but think of it as an entire program.
But I will say that exactly what you said, and the problem that you had with it, which is that a couple of the songs are kind of more middle of the road, that mainly happens on the second side.
Right. There's a little cluster of them there.
There's a two-song cluster. I Want to Leave You and The Sun's Gonna Shine on My Back Door Someday. And also the bubblegum pop territory of Bazooka. And it feels like, but the more I listen to it, the more I feel like and I don't even care if this was intended, that this guy, part of the concept of this record is that as much as he tries to throw a lid on his, idiosyncratic nature, it'll just wind up exploding out of him because he tries to put the lid on it and the fucking album ends with There's No Soul Sister, which is batshit crazy that this guy would attempt this particular song.
It's a good move at the end, an unexpected move. It's one of the lesser songs for me too, although I like it a lot. I can hear Leon Russell doing that song.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Gunther Hades, because that is just a classic.
Well, and that is what happened to me the first time and early on. Why it took a little while for Seven Nights in the Barbary Coast to rise is because Gunther Hades is all the way there. As far as what he's doing, it's an astonishing song. Incredible shuffle groove. When he's singing about the boxcars, then again, we got the Americana thing going on. Like this is a way of life that's disappearing. And then, you're thinking, the boxcar hobo thing. Then you find out, he's like this dangerous, deformed character who has had so much misery put in his life that he becomes a serial killer, basically. And when he's singing about he gets out of the boxcar, this guy's, living in boxcars, traveling around. He has no home, and he has all this rage he has to let out, and it's literally, that's the point. There's no meaning to his targets, and he puts it in the song like, he's scary to anybody. It doesn't matter whether you crossed him or not. The imagery of him just only coming out at night, when he's mentioning shadows hiding his Quasimodo form and silent as the whisper of a shroud and so forth. You really get a character study sort of going here.
It is. Every song is like a character study, which is really cool. I love those pounded out lower key piano thumps, man.
And the break in the middle is great too. It actually briefly goes to a different place where the little jam is, and about, it's only maybe less than a minute long, but about halfway through that jam, for a brief moment, you're inside one of those sort of free Grateful Dead type jams, just for a brief moment. It shares that kind of like open space of one of their early space jams, just for a moment. Ray Harlow and Gyp Fox do that a couple times in their album, but that is so good that it takes you there, and then it brings you back, to where it was. I like songs that give you a little unexpected.
One of my favorites of that kind of a song is Total Trash by Sonic Youth on Daydream Nation. It falls apart and then reconstitutes itself, almost like it's vomiting itself out of itself. It's amazing.
It's good when things do that structurally. It's a move that I like a lot of the time, when they almost lapse into kind of disorder, like you think it's dissolving a little bit and then it coalesces again.
Well, the next song is not like that, because it is a very highly structured and, like you had mentioned, Americana-based song. One of my favorites on the record, and some serious down-home old folks on the prairie style harmonica, and terrific Tears Falling from Heaven pedal steel. Also a nice, super polite duet with the titular Nelly, whoever it is singing with him.
That's a key element to this record, is the background vocals and the other singers. It emerges everywhere, and it really warms things up.
Like a Stone Man, it's not my favorite song on the record. It's my least favorite song on the first side.
No, it's one of my favorites.
Oh, really?
It's one of the, like, half of the album that initially leapt out at me. And I think part of it is it has the interesting way it starts with almost a little bit of a Baroque keyboard sort of move or something, and then it goes into the riff, and it's a boasting type of song. I like it. It has a little bit of a comical approach to me, like there's a little bit of tongue in cheek going on in his mind with his braggadocio about if he moves, your walls come tumbling down. Like a mad dog, I bite. I like that one a lot. And I think the guitar break is perfect. It has a great guitar break as well.
The guitar break, I actually think blows, but
I think it's perfect.
but in a good way. I think that whoever's playing that, it's like a dweedle kind of a thing.
I don't hear it that way. I hear it as like nicely structured.
Our ears did different things to us during that song then. But that's, like my dad says constantly, that's what makes horse racing.
Absolutely.
Whistle Stop is very interesting. Some super mysterious piano line action, kicking off a more church-centered waltz time thing. But it has these mysterioso elements that take it into its own little thing, your Twilight Zone thing that you talk about all the time. Crowns of Thorns, too, you gotta love it. I mean, it's like Mickey Newberry is produced by the late great Angelo Badalamenti.
Yeah, that's a good vibe. I can hear that. Certainly in the drama, the music, the keyboard thing, but then the violins come in, and I get sometimes a little bit of a Scott Walker even ambiance or something going on.
Yeah,
and the moodiness of the strings and the overriding image of the song as well, Whistle Stop. This is like a song about, people that are sort of doomed to wander the night and have only these moments of connection that never work out. Because the image of Whistle Stop is...
Whistle Stop? I'm just singing the Jordanaires.
Yeah. The image of it is a whistle stop, like when... And back in the days of trains, and I guess they still do it now, when somebody wants to get off, but it's either not a scheduled stop, it's in between, or it's a stop that if nobody signals they want to get off, in order to save time, they keep moving on. So a whistle stop is sort of like somebody wanting to get off that train. I'm hearing it as him having whistle stops along the way, meeting some people and women, and it never works out because he's always got to keep traveling. And he brings out at the end when he starts singing about what am I doing in a rock and roll band, just
here's the thing,
moving through the night.
The thing about the rock and roll band, that's probably my favorite moment of the whole record, because he's singing about getting a job in a rock and roll band over a very haunting minor key piano figure. And he's making it sound like it's to be considered on the same level as allowing yourself to be tortured or mutilated. There's
a surrender there. There's like a...
Why is he terrified?
He's terrified. It's kind of like giving up, like he's having this moment of revelation that I'm kind of like where I'm at. This is it for me. I sense definitely this haunted giving up, surrender sort of thing. Like, it's not like, usually when people talk about joining a rock band and rock and roll music, it's like a call to arms or something. And to him, it's like, I guess, what's left to do? I guess I'll, join this rock.
This is a guy who's intentionally shooting for the moon and trying to become a rock star, and he's haunted. But it could be my favorite song on the record. The repeating piano figure, if it's not been sampled for hip hop purposes, it needs to be immediately. Flight of the Phoenix is a beaut of a rump shaker, more funk, less tonk, right? Wouldn't you say? Some Tom Jones style belting on top of some dirty funk backings.
Yeah, really great funky. That's as explicitly funky as the album gets. And it works perfectly too. It's kind of unexpected, the juxtaposition of the various musical ideas. It works.
This could have gone south easy, and it really doesn't.
Good about relationships too. Again, because so many of the songs are about women, and to have this like Flight of the Phoenix, like it's not working out. He's the Phoenix. Deja vu. I'm a phoenix again. I'm a phoenix again. And he sings like, I think my favorite images that come in and when he talks about how when he was a child playing with Lincoln logs and Tinker toys, his creativity was engaged in putting things together and creating. And then after that, he has the image now, like it's like everything is already pre-made or something. Like he's somehow relating that also to his like relationships with people, like they're kind of sealed off and ready-made to him now or something. And this sense of discovery that needs to be maintained to have a growing relationship is not happens for him. And he's doomed to be the phoenix flying again repeatedly.
This together with Pile Driver, it feels like these two were congregated together on purpose as a sort of funk break. Can't remember if there's sax on Pile Driver, but the sax on Flight of the Phoenix is really like sleazy end of the strip, kind of Vegas sax wailings.
Yeah.
And then the farther this thing, Pile Driver's the most famous song on the record, I guess, because it's been on Country Funk and a bunch of other comps. Those guitar leads are shriekingly nuts. And it's actually, as the album progresses here, it's getting funkier and dirtier on the bottom end. The farther
completely, yeah. The drumming on Pile Driver is phenomenal.
This is also the last song before it kind of faints left. But yeah, go ahead.
For this album, of course, as history has shown with other people, it's the song that I DJ. It's the one that's most accessible. And the way the drumming comes in, it's like when you want to get things a little funky down and dirty mid-tempo, it's like perfect way the song is set up. And yet, it has that thing going on, but like you had mentioned the sound of the guitar. And to me, it's almost kind of a little bit scary and sardonic or something when that guitar breaks comes in with that Leslie effect tone. The funky undercurrent is great. When the bass comes in, of course, you're right there. Boom, boom, boom. It's like there's nothing tentative about it. It's like, okay, here we go. It keeps on with, like Gunther Hades and the other ones here with these characters from the underbelly.
Then comes a sort of, you either go on this ride or you do not go on this ride. But the next two songs, if I may for a moment, I Want to Leave You is a decent ballad, a little bit more stripped back than its neighbors. But we're back in Mysterioso territory, away from the funk, but with that preening over-the-top vocal style and some kind of Barry Manilow-like schmaltz leanings. And then the song after that, to kind of group it together, The Sun's Gonna Shine on My Back Door Someday. We all know the song, but this particular version is a very weirdly anodyne creation, especially in light of the material that's preceded it. I kind of don't know where he's coming from, what he's doing, or if there's even a viewpoint. Then we have Bubblegum Pop. So what I want to ask you, Paul, to backtrack here is, do you think this was an intentional, what I had said before about the, starting to fantasize about that concept? I'm probably, investing way too much thought into it, right?
I think with these, this is the sort of a side effect of doing the versatile thing. Him thinking, let's show my range. Because certainly with his skills, he could have had everything along the lines of the, outsider lost Americana that's going on there. But I'm thinking, probably even himself was thinking that, something like Gunther Hades is probably a little far out for radio. But when I hear I Want to Leave You, it's like, even the way he sings it, his voice is very different on that song from any of the other ones. It just seems to me more like this one might be, something for the radio or whichever. It's just, there's nothing really unusual about the words, this is such a literate album that it's sort of like, in this case, the words are less important than making this song that maybe could be a pop song or something. Because it does, lean into a little bit of the Barry Manilow, whichever thing, just sort of a predictable.
You hate them?
No, they're okay because of his voice in that. But yeah, I can be okay with him going there for a little bit. Plus, it is a little odd,
I wouldn't quite group Bazooka in the same category. Bazooka, right? Because it's kind of an Osmond's bubblegum pop.
I like Bazooka after time.
Yeah, me too.
And it's a little silly with the la la la's and everything, but the thing about you can write a song and everybody can be a star, and that funny line about getting a girl to make his clothes, getting the doctor to fix his nose, and all this stuff. It's like he's maybe thinking, well, we're going to take this stuff down to L.A. I'm going to write a song about being a star, but then he does the move, like everybody can be a star,
What's funny is you look at a case study like Oasis. They did the same thing. Their first album was, role playing, being rock and roll stars, but they actually crossed over. What happens when you do that and you don't cross over? It's a very strange. It's kind of the ghost of an actual event. Anyway, yeah, Bazooka is definitely.
It's a catchy song, and I enjoy it. Figuring, he's not being utterly sincere there. He's having a little fun with the idea too, something like, it has a little bit of whimsy, which is an odd element to appear on the record. But one thing I'd have to say too about the Know You Rider, Sun's Gonna Shine on My Back Door someday riff is you hope it would go somewhere. The only thing I think distinguishes it, or maybe adds something to that song, is the little guitar riff and is different. The rhythm's done a little different than other versions, but I think if they would have emphasized that little guitar riff that's going through the whole thing, it could have been more successful. He doesn't sound committed there either.
I've heard this song mainly by the Dead, but by a lot of different acts in many different iterations. This is clearly the worst version of it that I've heard, but it's the worst version to me in a way that makes it interesting, because what it's surrounded by is so unique and idiosyncratic and flag-wavingly weird that to back away from that in such a big way is incredibly striking. Almost like it was meant to be that way, but I don't think it was.
No, I think it was, doing the variety thing was in mind. And, for me, just like even the one before, I Want to Leave You, because of the power of everything else, I can integrate in my mind those into the program, so to speak. Certain albums, like the John Scoggins album, not to get too far afield, 9 songs that are all great, and one song that it's not an option that you could let it play. You actually have to pull it off. With this, it's like, okay, maybe he's given a little, he's laid all this heavy stuff on. He's given a little breathing space for your mind, but he's going to keep coming at you. Yeah. These are the way I sort of deal with it in my mind.
It's a cool bump in the road. I actually appreciate the bump in this particular road. But after Bazooka, we're kind of back on track. There's nothing that feels like an outlier. Walkin' is kind of aw shucks, kick the can balladry. It's not a major piece of work, but it is a sweet, innocent little tune.
Yeah, and the minimal production works for it too. It has an unusual sonic sort of landscape, and the harmonicas works excellent too. So right, it's not so far into the characters and into the thickness of the thing as Gunther Hades and Whistle Stop and things like that, but it is of a piece. It works with the record, and it's the right kind of record to have a walk-in song on too.
As a song, I like it, but as a closer, it's terrific. There's No Soul Sister. We're back firmly entrenched in the seedy honky tonks, which was the keyhole through which we first entered this totally almighty, unique and fully sculpted musical universe. So I love it for that reason. What's your thoughts on There's No Soul Sister?
I like it as an ending song. It's good. It could be like things build up to the major pieces of the record. To me, there's a little bit of a lightness in going that direction, mood wise. It's a little more upbeat. You got the honky tonks in that, but then you also got him singing about it's South Harlem, where he meets her. She's a keyboard player. I can't remember how long it was, but very early on when I started listening to this record, I just thought, this song could have replaced Queen of the Roller Derby on Leon Russell's Carney album or something. It just has that little bit of rock and roll sort of feeling, a little bit of flashback to the honky tonks, and there's nothing unusual about it. It's straight up.
When you look at the first side and the second side, it's obviously front loaded, because the first side you love like a stone man, but for me, notwithstanding that song, every song is a classic. But then the second side starts with Pile Driver, but then after Pile Driver, there's nothing that's on that level. Pile Driver is the end of the great songs, but look, overall, this guy's like a cross between Walter Mitty and Stagger Lee, but only Stagger Lee in its hyperbolically skewed self-perception, not in its level of blackness. There's an assortment of what I perceive as truly inspired work that accidentally struck the man like lightning, some Vegas review type confusion that appears way off the mark of intention by its creator. Some of that material is amazing, some of it's only decent. But from a full view of the thing, it's a mighty impressive, complete, wholly rounded package of form and intent. I give it 4 1/3 stars.
It'd be a 4 for me. there's no doubt it'd be a 5-star if it wasn't for the grouping of the 3 on the second side that are lesser. I can enjoy those, but if I was trying to turn somebody onto him, I would not want them to hear those songs or something, though. Like hearing those songs without the context of the other ones would emphasize that there's nothing as creative going on there. And I attribute that to, at least with a song like Bazooka and I Want to Leave You, to his, was assembling these songs to get a deal and so forth and show his versatility, and not so much thinking of this as a concept album. Yet even with those songs and with the themes and that, it works like a concept album to me. It's so of a piece. It's like a consistent journey to some different places, but it's that part of America, and it really is a disparate collection of songs, but the cohesiveness of his vision even elevates the songs that seem to be like he didn't write this really from inside or really trying to do something new. He wrote this one thinking, oh, maybe this one will make me a little money or something. Those songs are less incredible, but so I give it, for me, it's like a 4.
Well, first I want to ask you, man, before we wrap up with, what happened afterwards with this guy, which is a very interesting twist on and then they produced this record and disappeared into thin air story. Were you the guy who introduced this one onto the scene?
Certainly, the more psych scene, et cetera, the more hip hop people that sample in that was much later. But considering it was the late 80s, I guess, when I first had a spare copy to let go. I think I'm the person that connected it with people like Peter Grudzian and other people, where this is a unique personality, a guy making a record that has a lot of real life captured on it. So I think I'm the first, who sounded the horn that this is a big deal. In those early days, it was still a bit far out for most people. It took a long time for people to take seriously the Real People records and so forth. Got to be garage rock or fuzz guitar or hard. That this Dennis the Fox sound was a little bit. You have to have heard a bit of music to penetrate this one and realize how special it is.
Because there's an Elvis in the mid 70s kind of vibe to some of it with the background singers. Your ears in the reverse way that it works with Daniel Johnston, where your ears would have to be able to, add a bunch of stuff that he wasn't able to use. For this, your ears would need to be able to strip some of this stuff away to hear that there's, a very unique, strange, specific, idiosyncratic voice at the center. His voice was not quelled after this record. I think he was kind of kicking around through a lot of the 70s. I know he played keyboards with a local band called Tiny Tony and the Statics. In the late 70s, like between 79 and 81, Dennis hooked up with Tom Bell, and his career took a serious turn. Bell had recently relocated to Seattle, so he was cutting tracks with Elton John, the Spinners. Dennis was there working as a manager with Mighty 3 Music, which was the publishing arm of Philadelphia International Records and Tom Bell Productions. And he would basically assess new songs, coach songwriters, and land songs with artists. So along the way, a bunch of his songs actually got placed with some singers, and so he actually had a career.
He did. Like I said, he moved more into the management, the song plugging, the behind the scenes sort of thing.
Cruise ships too. He worked as the assistant cruise director for the Princess Cruise Line in the 80s. I don't know if you know this. This I can actually envision. He eventually launched a new career as an auctioneer for hire.
Right.
Totally left field.
A lot of these people end up doing something that is not an ordinary job. Most of them end up doing a career here, but something like an auctioneer.
A great quote to kind of seal things off here. In 2013, collector and the operator of the Now Again label, Ethan Alapat, he commented about Dennis. This guy's really had it all and is one of the nicest, most normal guys you'll ever meet. He just happened to make an album that sounds as if some seedy weirdo Northwestern biker drag made it on his way to the pen.
That's a testimony to his talent.
And then one final quote: when it comes to really living, you're just somewhere in between. There's a high-stepping, side-stepping life outside you ain't never seen.
Yep. He is a seeker who was seeking in different territory from all the other seekers of the day.
In different bodies and in different forms. I want to thank him for releasing this and creating it. I want to thank Paul for introducing it to me. I want to thank DJ Shadow for sampling him. He sampled Pile Driver. And I want to thank the universe for creating things like this. Because holy shit, it's fucking awesome. So
it's
great.
It is, and it stands the test of time too. Because, this will be like easy 35 years or whatever since I first had it, at least, I think. And it's one of the ones that constantly re-enhances itself somehow in my mind. You never feel like, oh, I've penetrated the depths of this. Now I've got it all arranged in my mind. It's brain.
Yeah, it's impossible to for the mind to fully comprehend this thing. It also is a grower. So the more I listened to it, the more I found I was loving it. I want to thank you for helping me lift the lathe on this incredibly heavy lathe that we got for the 1,000 copies of Dennis Calderola, Dennis the Fox's Mother Trucker, and we'll see you next week.
Right on.